Nope.
It's on the back
I know.
screen. Okay.
It won't be up for long. Hello, everybody.
What's up, Ghost Gang?
So, we are here to talk about our next podcast. So, this is episode 2. This is our second one that we've done, our live and raw podcast. So, what we're talking about here today, and if you can see this screen, zoom in a little bit. So, like this says, the Burger Chef, ciphers, killings, and bombings. So, Speedway Burger Chef murders, the Speedway bombings, and is that your phone?
Please pause.
Hey, it's live. Whatever. Live and all that kind of shit's gonna happen. So,
Yep.
And the Julius Cyphers killing. So, there's a lot of stories about all of this that are these connected. So we did some research on it, and we went through the timeline of everything, and that's what we're going to kind of cover with you today, because we, in our gut, feel like it's all connected. So that's what we're going to kind of run down. And the lead culprit in all of this was Speedway guy Brett Kimberlin. So shortly after Kimberlin graduated from Speedway, he was convicted in 1973 for felony perjury, lying to a grand jury that was investigating his drug trafficking. So Kimberlin was a well-known drug dealer in the area, just pretty known, I guess, as far as I understand. In 1973, I was not even quite 3 years old, so.
I wasn't born.
And he wasn't even born yet, so.
Not even thought of.
So let's see here. Let's go over some of the stuff that we researched. So Kimberlin had been called before a grand jury investigating his drug use at his old high school, and he was convicted of perjury. Claimed that he had not sold LSD. I'm sure there's a whole lot more into that. But Kimberlin only served 21 days of a year sentence. So I'm sure how he managed to pull that one off, but he did. In '76, Kimberlin's drug business was grossing hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. So he was doing quite well. See, in '76, when he was doing that, I wasn't quite 6 years old yet. So
Still wasn't born.
I'm aging myself. Yeah, we're doing this. I'm kind of doing this on purpose. Tyler a little bit. By the way, Wayne, Tyler, hopefully you've watched enough of the videos and you already know who we are. But,
Yeah. And if you're from Speedway watching this and you have any recollections of how this all went down, please feel free, comment, let us know. I know my dad was alive when this all went down, so we'd love to hear your guys' take on it as we kind of go through things. And when you watch this, let us know.
Yeah, we'll go back through and read any of the comments that you leave behind, and maybe we'll touch base on those after the podcast or some on another date. It'd be real interesting to hear what anybody else has to say. And even if you don't watch this live and you watch it some other time, please leave comments for us. Just would love to read you guys' opinions on stuff. And maybe there's things that you know that didn't quite make it into the papers and all the research and stuff that we found. But so let's see, where was I? Talking about Kimberlin making all that money. He invested his drug money, his drug profit, into businesses as a retail health food store, a vegetation restaurant, and an earth shoe franchise. Whatever an earth shoe is, I don't know. Sandals, I guess. Jesus sandals. So, said, however, Kimberlin became a suspect in the murder of Julia Cyphers. So this is where everything first starts to get dark. She was the mother of an employee of Kimberlin's back at Speedway, and this happened in 1978. So 78 is our key date here. This is when everything starts to unravel.
Go crazy.
So,
go
ahead.
And actually, after Julia was murdered, there was never a motive established. Prosecutors, police, they believed Kimberlin went on this bombing spree that happened in '78 to deflect the attention away from the ongoing investigation of Julia Cyphers. She was 65 when she was murdered. Julia believed that Brett Kimberlin, was way too friendly with her daughter Sandra Barton, which again, Sandra Barton was employed through Brett Kimberlin. Um, she believed that he had a strange affection, specifically to Barton's preteen daughter, and she had frequently accompanied him, Kimberlin, on several unsupervised out-of-state trips. To me, that's really
That sounds
weird. I mean,
suspicious.
I guess this is like a different time, but there's no chance that if I was the father, that would be happening.
Oh, I don't think my parents. If I had a little sister or something like that.
No
there's
chance.
No way my parents would have let my sister go on a trip like that.
No chance. Unsupervised, no. But then on July 29th of 1978, Cypher's Julia was shot to death just outside of her home. Her husband Fred briefly saw the shooter, who he actually identified as a guy named William Bowman as the gunman. Bowman was a close associate of Kimberlin's with all of his drug trade. But Fred, Julia's husband, being the only witness, he actually died shortly after the murder. And so William Bowman was never charged, and Julia's murder still remains unsolved.
Yeah, so it's kind of horrible, but I think there's a tie right there. I mean, you've got the associate and everything.
I mean, yeah, William and Brett being kind of together in this drug trade, I can certainly see.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 months later, on September 1st, we get 3 separate explosions. This is when the bombings started happening in town. So real quick, if anyone doesn't know anything about the town of Speedway, currently there's maybe 13,000 people that live in the town of Speedway, and that is it. So back in the 70s, there was even less. So it was a small town back then. It's also home to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. A lot of people call that Indy. No.
It's
not Indianapolis. It's right here in our town.
It's ours.
It's Speedway. So I had to throw that plug out there because it's like our favorite place to ever hang out. So
Correct.
next to the pub. But,
Yeah.
so anyway, back to this. On September 1st, 78, 2 months after Julia Cyphers was murdered, 3 explosions go off. They were improvised explosions, so they weren't like high tech or anything. And they all went off in trash bins. And so there was no injuries, minor, damage, things like that. Speedway did call in explosive experts from the state police, from the Marion County Sheriff's Department, which Marion County is Indianapolis. The 64th Ordnance from nearby, whatever that means, Fort Benjamin Harrison. So Fort Ben was a former military base on the north side. So, and specialists from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF. They had a 100-person strong task force to try to solve the case. And like I said, the devices were simple homemade bombs constructed out of soda cans packed with Tovex 200 and a trigger mechanism. So Tovex, if you don't know what that is, it's an explosive.
It's like today's Tannerite.
Yeah, if you guys know what that is, you shoot one of those, boom, it's a real loud boom. It's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
Not cool if you're building bombs out of the shit, though. So 2 more blasts hit Speedway the following Saturday. So now we're up to 5. So one went off the day at a local bowling alley.
Is that Raceway?
Yeah, that would have been Raceway Lanes.
Raceway Lanes.
Raceway Lanes right across from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's closed down today. It's been closed for a number of years.
Yeah.
The next day, police responded to a bomb threat at the Speedway Coca-Cola plant, which we have a Coca-Cola plant here in town, on 25th Street, which is catty corner from Speedway High School. So they responded to that.
It was actually fake, though.
But that turned out to be false, I think. And then we get 2 other calls. So they had another call into, where am I at? Am I jumping? Am I getting ahead of myself?
No, we're talking about the apartments.
Oh, yes. So I did get a little bit ahead of myself. I was getting ready to talk about something else. So later that day, another device explodes underneath a police cruiser. So this, to me, in my opinion, is getting a little more ballsy, if you will,
Oh, yeah.
to place a device under a police cruiser where you could have initially hurt the police officer who was getting in it. Although they're set on a timer to go off, you obviously can't time when someone's going to try to get in the car. So thankfully, at the time that went off into the cruiser, that officer was out on sick leave, so he was not in and out of his car. So it only damaged the car. The officer was fine.
Is Big Eagle Creek or Big Eagle Apartments? Is that what we now know as Eagle Creek Court?
No. So Big Eagle is, I think they call it Lakeside now. It's
Oh,
right
on
off of 25th Street.
21st?
21st Street.
Okay.
So I grew up in Big Eagle.
Okay.
So I spent almost 8 years living in the apartment complex. Shortly after we had first moved here. So I spent a lot of time in that complex. I know it well. At the time these bombings were happening in September, I was 7 years old. I wasn't quite 8 yet. My birthday's at the end of the year, so I'm never quite anything during the year. I'm always stuck on that same age. So I do kind of remember this stuff happening, and I do kind of remember the police cruiser getting bombed.
You're right. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really ballsy,
It
but
is.
such a blessing in disguise that he was out on leave.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're right. You can't
I mean, you
time
could've-
it, but
Could
God
essentially
forbid.
killed a police officer. I mean,
God forbid.
that would, that's not good.
No. So actually, the last bombing took place on September 6th of 1978. Just prior to that final bombing, an additional 2 bomb threats were called in for Thatcher Golf Course, which isn't too far behind Allison Transmission, the Speedway plant. And there was also a cinema. We also had the cinema in the Speedway Shopping Center. And then which is behind Speedway High School. So Thatcher Golf Course and the Speedway Cinema. I had one of my birthdays there.
The Speedway Center,
Oh
before
yeah,
they closed it?
it was Men in
Go
Black.
all the time. Yeah.
I think it was Men in Black. Might have been Titanic. I
I
don't
used to
know.
go all the time because you could get in from watch movies for like $1.
Oh hell yeah!
It was great.
It was next to the pet store. The good days.
Yeah. We used to sneak in sometimes too.
Rebels.
Right.
So those were some additional bomb threats, but things kind of took an even darker turn. An explosive device was concealed in a gym bag in the Speedway High School parking lot. It was found shortly after a freshman football game. Now that one, there were injuries involved. There was a Vietnam War vet. He was 39 years old. His name's Carl DeLong. Completely took off his right leg. It had to be amputated. Well, not
Didn't
completely.
take off, damaged
Not
it
completely.
enough.
Damaged enough that it had to be amputated. Carl DeLong actually saw the bag, proceeded to pick it up, and then it exploded. So aside from nearly severing his right leg, which had to be amputated, it also jacked up his left leg, his right hand, and his wife had an artery that was pretty badly damaged in her leg because she was walking with him. There's the DeLong son. His name's Steve. He was playing in that freshman football game and actually didn't even know his parents were at the game. So Steve and the rest of the freshman team were in the locker room while all the parents were waiting outside by their cars when the actual explosion happened. Steve, the son, actually went on to be in a rock band, pretty successful music career. He was a singer for his band, Sweet FA, that spanned a couple of albums and had some radio play. Because no motive ever emerged from these bombings, law enforcement just had no idea why they completely stopped after September 6th.
And the photo that's on the screen now that you can see behind us, that's from the Speedway High School parking lot where that explosion happened. That badly injured Mr. DeLong. So
That's crazy.
yeah, it's pretty wild.
God.
Yeah. So that was at the very beginning of the month, September. That first week of September, the first 6 days, everyone's on edge over explosions and stuff going on. On September 20th, federal agents arrested 27-year-old Brent Kimberlin, and obtained a United States, because he was trying to obtain United States government
This is
credentials
really weird.
illegally. So let me back this one photo up here. This is Kimberlin here. This is a photo of him back about that time frame.
What? Good.
It's this scrawny little guy.
Probably handsome back in the
You
day.
know, if you saw him walking down the street or passed him anywhere in
I
a
wouldn't think
restaurant
he
or
would.
something, you would never know he was an up and coming, drug dealer. Not small time. He was dealing big time drugs and, believed to have initiated the killing on the one lady and
He just looks like the guy
sold the
next
bombs.
door.
Yeah, it's nothing fancy.
Jeez.
Well, we'll sneak peek at what's coming here. Sorry about that. So anyway, a little more about him. So they arrested him. He was trying to obtain United States government credentials illegally. An owner of a West Side printing shop became suspicious when Kimberlin, dressed in Defensive Department security uniform, and asked him to reproduce military driver's licenses with Kimberlin's picture. And so he called the police and the United States Army. So that's what tipped them off. So Kimberlin was arrested when he came back to the printing shop to pick up the documents. So
Genius.
good for the printing guy.
Absolutely
To
genius.
be paying attention to something like that. It's definitely a red flag. People still do that stupid
I
shit
know.
today, trying to get away
Absolutely.
with things. It's crazy. So after obtaining the search warrant for Kimberlin's home and his vehicle, investigators found wiring similar to those of the explosive devices and a mark time appliance timer in his 1970 Impala. The subsequent search of his home revealed more than 1,000 pounds of marijuana and 2 cases of Tovex. That's the explosive used in those bombs. The purchase was traced by their lot number.
Yeah, the timer
I'm gonna
tracers.
zoom in this.
The timer tracers were
Yeah, they were
identified.
traced by lot numbers to Kimberlin in 75. So he purchased them some years back. So that gives you, what do they call it? It's premeditated.
Premeditated.
So he all along thought he may have to use explosives for something.
Mm-hmm.
3 years later, the one gal gets killed. Now is his time to start using explosives to be a deterrent. So he had some of this stuff in his possession for a number of years.
Yeah.
Authorities also confiscated multiple legal yellow pads from Kimberlin's residence, but never revealed what was on them. So remember that comment, because we're going to touch base on that again here shortly as we continue unfolding this timeline. So remember the legal pads.
Yeah. For those of you who are too young, legal pads are just like notebook
Oh.
paper, but they were yellow.
And instead of your everyday tablet,
Oh yeah.
people actually wrote down stuff.
Yeah.
For you youngsters that could be watching. Yay big legal pads. Some of them were larger, I guess, 8.5 by 11. But
Yeah.
some were
Most
smaller.
were just
Yeah.
smaller. And actually, pictures of Kimberlin were taken to the only local appliance store that sold those mark times, which is the device that was used to time set off these IEDs, the bombs. So when they took his picture to this one and only local store, the employees of that store were able to positively identify Kimberlin as the person who purchased those mark times. Additionally, this part's a little crazy, but because we don't know who it is, but another eyewitness came forward and identified Brett Kimberlin as the man that he saw place one of the explosives in a trash can back on September 1st. The ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Fire, were able to positively match both of the timers that they found and a wire that was found in Kimberlin's car, but they did not press any charges immediately at that time because they wanted to build their case. In October of '78, 2 weeks after his arrest, Kimberlin was somehow released, although again, charges were never dismissed. So they knew what they had on him, they released him, but they were using this as an opportunity to build upon what they're gonna actually get this Brett Kimberlin for.
It's strange how he doesn't ever seem to stay in
No.
jail very long.
No, he's just
Like earlier, we were talking about him getting in trouble. He got a year sentence on perjury,
Mhm.
and he only did 21 days. It's like, how does this guy keep?
I
How does he keep getting his ass out
I
of
don't
jail so easily?
I don't want to speculate, but I think that's also kind of indicative of a piece of information that we've got coming up. Like just things back then, the way it happened are not the same way
They're
that they would
not the
happen
same
today.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So see, we leave off on October of '78.
On November
Um,
on November 17th.
no, what you were just talking about.
Oh yeah. In October of '78, he was
Yeah.
arrested
So that was-
for 2 weeks. He spent 2 weeks in and then back out on the streets.
Yeah, so that would, our next date falls November 17th. So that's 6 weeks after. So it was about mid-October when he was released. So now he's back on the street, and this is where the infamous Burger Chef comes into play. Everyone in town here in Speedway has heard this story, knows this story.
Knows where it's at. It just got demolished, like to the ground.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that and show that at the end of this.
Yeah.
So this is wild because somewhere between 11 and midnight, they were closing up the Burger Chef. And this was over on Crawfordsville Road. If you're familiar with the town, probably the biggest store across from that is at Kohl's. So if you know where the Kohl's is here in Speedway, on the other side, you had the Burger Chef. Used to be a Dunkin' Donuts right next to it.
Yeah.
No longer there. As kids, as little kids, we used to ride our bikes to the Burger Chef and Dunkin' Donuts on a regular basis all the time. And then, of course, this happens. 4 employees from the Burger Chef vanished. They disappeared. And assistant manager Jane Freed, I'm going to probably say that name wrong, so I'll love it. Daniel Davis, who was 16, Jane was 20, Davis was 16, Mark Clemens was 16, and Ruth Ellen Shelton was 18. The 3 teenagers were also Speedway High School students. That's important to remember because if we think back about Kimberlin, now we don't know for sure that he's tied to this, but if you think back about Kimberlin, the drug guy that he is, and getting in trouble well after he had graduated for selling drugs at his old school, Speedway High School, same place where these students are. So that all ties together. As far as the drug thing goes, there's a tie there.
And he seems to have an infatuation with younger.
He seems to have something about that
individuals.
because hanging out with the one gals and had a thing for the teenage daughter.
Mhm.
So there's something kind of odd there, if you ask me.
Unsupervised out-of-state travel.
Right? So
Well,
a fellow
sketchy.
employee had come by the Burger Chef around midnight and noticed that the restaurant was empty, the safe was open, and the back door was ajar. So, and I don't know if I did put on here. So, police found 2 empty currency bags and an empty roll of adhesive tape next to the open safe. So, what else did they find?
I mean, it gets kind of weird because the police who were investigating didn't even actually consider this to be that serious of what
Right.
they had found, given that the management of the Burger Chef at the time only reported the loss of about $581 from the safe, and there wasn't any signs of any struggle. Like nothing was knocked over, nothing looked super crazy. So the police just thought that the young kids that they are at the time, they stole the money to go out partying. I mean, there was $100 in coins that it was still left in the registers. So I mean, if money was the motive, why are you leaving all of this extra behind? The odd thing is that the purses and jackets of the missing 2 girls were left at the store. But the theft theory was initially the most plausible. So because they thought it was just petty theft, the employees of Burger Chef, the rest of the employees, were allowed to clean that scene, which we now know was actually a crime scene,
Right.
the following morning, which was a Saturday, because full intent was we're going to get this back up and running Saturday morning
Yep.
and continue
Go
on
about
business
business.
as usual. Correct.
The kids will come back.
Yeah, yes. But Buddy Elwinger, who was a Speedway officer at the time, and eventually assigned to this case, actually admitted, we screwed it up from the beginning. So not only was the restaurant cleaned and allowed to be reopened, no photographs were ever taken beforehand. So effectively eliminating all potential evidence at that crime scene. They have nothing to really go on where this initially took. Oh my gosh!
Not even take photos.
Yes, they have nothing to go on where this initially all stemmed from, which is why I said I think that previous part was kind of indicative for the way things used to happen is not how it happens today.
Yeah. You would think even back then, common sense would tell you to take some photographs.
You would think.
You would think.
But it's a small town. I mean,
yeah.
Still, you need to do your due diligence.
Absolutely.
Things got kind of dicey and a little bit more intently investigated when the 4 employees of Burger Chef that worked that night did not come back. Freitz, which is the assistant manager, he's the 20-year-old. She's the assistant manager. Her Chevy Vega was found. It was partially locked here in Speedway. There's the growing concerns. It did eventually become evident that the 4 employees had been abducted while closing the restaurant for the night, with the attack possibly beginning as they removed the trash from inside out the back door.
Yeah. So this is where it goes really bad. So the following day, Sunday afternoon, down in Johnson County in Greenwood, so a lot of you probably know where that is at if you're from Indiana. Some hikers found all 4 bodies of the youths. It's about 20 miles away from the restaurant. So both Davis and Shelton had been shot numerous times with a .38 caliber.
Remember that, 38 caliber.
Jane, the 20-year-old assistant manager, had been stabbed twice in the chest. The handle of the knife had been broken off and was missing. That is somewhat important that we'll touch on later as well. The blade was later recovered during an autopsy, so that was still in her, which is kind of sad to think. And then Fleming, 16, was later determined to have been bludgeoned, possibly with a chain, and died from choking to death on his own blood. So remember that as well, because that gets touched on later. They said he was bludgeoned with what they thought was a chain. Mm-hmm. So just remember that, because there's another comment about him later on that does not line up with that.
Yeah, so 4 things to remember. Yellow legal notepad, .38 caliber, the knife being broken off, and the bludgeon, potentially a chain.
Right.
Keep those in mind.
So all 4 victims were still wearing their Burger Chef uniforms. Money and watches were found on the victims, so they didn't steal any of that, implying that the robbery might not have been the sole motive for the murders. So I would agree. You've got very little money missing from the restaurant. The employees still have all of their stuff on them, their watches and so forth. Robbery doesn't seem to be
not the main motive, no.
There's something else.
I think that the money at the store was an easy win.
Yeah. So the leading theory initially was that the 4 victims were kidnapped during a botched robbery, possibly after one of the victims had recognized one of the perpetrators. So Flemings, who was 16, was covering. What's that?
This part's weird.
Yeah, he was covering for another employee, and was not scheduled to be there that night. So leading investigators speculated that perhaps he was the one who recognized the killers, since they had not planned on him being there.
Yep. On the night of the murders, there was a 16-year-old eyewitness who came forward, and he said, I don't know if it's a he or she, they said they saw 2 suspicious men in a car outside of the Burger Chef just before closing. One guy had a beard, the other one was clean shaven but had light colored hair. The police actually had models of these suspects created out of clay to try to assist with this investigation. Um, while following up on those leads, actually, it takes us down to Franklin, where officers spotted a man who had a very strong resemblance to the guy who had the beard. It's composite. So they summoned a lineup, and the man with the beard actually shaved his beard, which he had had for 5 years plus, the night before he was supposed to go in for this lineup. A neighbor of his who had not been spotted by the original witness, but who had been named by the Greenwood suspect, subsequently went to prison for armed robbery. So like things are just not coming together for this investigation like one would hope. Another associate named by the Greenwood suspect fit the description of the fair-haired man. He was also subsequently in prison for other armed robberies of fast food restaurants.
Right.
So there's a lot of correlations here. Ironic that the guy who's had a beard for 5+ years decides to shave it when he's got to go in a lineup.
Yeah.
How
Seems kinda
how convenient.
So here's the clay models that were made of 2 of the suspects. There's one there with a beard. So I can zoom them in for you guys a little bit, and one without. Let's go to this next photo.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Clay models.
Clay models, yeah, it was a big thing back then. Now they just
That's,
draw 'em.
yeah, man, that's really weird. That's very time consuming.
Absolutely. And I guess it's forming from a drawing. I mean, you got to take it from somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's somebody's recollection.
Recollection.
Thank you. Now keep in mind that whoever saw these people, it was night.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was dark. It was 11 o'clock at night, maybe midnight. They see these people sitting in a car, so you're not going to see them just right, but you're going to get some glimpses of whatever, you know, sort of about the lighting in the area and so forth. But it's nighttime, so you know your memory about what you saw is probably going to be a little off. Which leads me to this photo here. So this photo intrigued me a lot. So the one in the middle is that clay model of this guy, and I'm pointing.
Oh, it's even got a
This guy
collared
over here.
shirt.
Yeah, with the collared shirt. So
I didn't even realize that.
yeah. So the pictures on each side are Brett Cumberland. So if you look at these,
There's a striking
there's a photo
resemblance.
with him in a collared shirt, the part in the hair. Now this one on that side over there. Where's the collared shirt one? Sorry, this
There,
side,
right.
this one right here. He's a little older in this photo, but this is just a photo with a collared shirt for the resemblance to the clay mold. The other one over here, that's over there, he's got a little bit of a beard going on here, but if you look at the hairline,
Pretty
it
similar.
looks a lot like this hairline in this sculpture.
Again, ironic. The guy who has a beard shaves it. The guy who doesn't have a beard.
Yeah, and then this one he's got a rough one here. Now I don't know the timeline on either one of those photos.
Yeah.
But just know the one where he's got a little bit of a beard going on, he's younger. The one when he doesn't, he's a little older. You know, again, the sculpture's hairline is a little further back, but yet you're given a description at nighttime. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be close. And in my opinion, if you look at the narrow lips, they've got narrow lips.
I would say even
The
that
nose is pretty
hairline
straight. I
is-
mean, it's a clay model, but the nose is straight. Eyes nice and wide open. The hairline essentially lines right up.
Oh.
Tyler had not seen these photos yet, so
No.
this was a
like,
first for him.
what? That's. I mean, that is.
So you guys can make your own judgment, make your own ideas, and I tend to think it looks a whole lot like Kimberlin. I don't know for sure if he was there or not. You know, obviously he was someone who was very much in charge of what he did, being the drug, you know, kingpin that he was, or growing into. You know, he had his hands in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is just really intrigued me. I just thought that, you know, there's a good possibility this is the same guy.
Yeah.
You guys can make your own call. You know, again, keep in mind, the description was made late at night. It's dark. It's not going to be perfect, but it's damn close in my mind.
That's pretty close. Yeah. Holy shit.
Yeah. That's a different one. So we'll just leave that one up for a minute.
Yeah.
So let's go back to where we were here. So without any confessions, and despite offers and plea deals to any of the suspects that Tyler was talking about, they were not directly, you know, held responsible for the killings. And without direct physical evidence of the involvement from the suspects in the murders, the police were not able to make any arrests with regards to those murders. So essentially, they went free. They couldn't convict them. At the time, there was speculation that the murders were tied to other crimes that had been shocked the town, such as the Speedway bombings that we talked about, the one lady, Julia Cyphers, who was murdered. All that leads back to this gentleman here on the screen.
Bomb threats.
Brent Kimberlin, and all the threats. So, you know, and at the time of the Burgess murders, Kimberlin was out.
Mm-hmm.
They had been released. Remember, he got released in October.
Yep.
These things happened 6 weeks later. So, yeah, he was on the street and probably doing his thing, his drug thing. Where were they at on here?
They just weren't able to
Yeah,
make
they
the
they just couldn't connect the two together. So, it's unfortunate. I don't know. Maybe it's a different time frame. You know, that was the 70s. This is, you know, 2024, and I'm much older now, and I think a lot different. Obviously, to me, I would have put more resources on Kimberlin after all of this with the clay model and stuff that came out, and that just didn't seem like that ever happened.
I for sure would have too, but there's been so many advances in the field of criminal justice and
Sure.
what they're able to do. But I think that the officer who was assigned to this case at the time absolutely hit the nail on the head. They screwed themselves from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you couldn't catch them back in that time, at least do your due diligence, keep it an open case, and as years progress, we see it happen all the time. Like
all the time.
old open cases that are unsolved. You know, the technology is here now, and we can go back and tie specific individuals to specific crimes. So it's unfortunate that this is the way that
Elaborate a little more on Kimberlin.
Yeah, actually, if
Since
you
we're talking about him now, elaborate a little bit more on him.
Yep. His life does not slow down or get any less crazy. So a few months later, in February 16th of 79, he was down in Texas at a makeshift airport, and he was supervising the unloading of a drug plane. But this drug plane went through bad weather and it had low fuel, so that led the airplane's crew to offload while they were in air a shipment of 10,000 pounds of marijuana from Colombia in 50-pound bales. So nothing to joke around about. I mean, this is the real deal.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. I mean, they offloaded this pot over just a giant area of southeast Texas, so the plane could land at a real airport as opposed to this makeshift airport where Kimberlin was. Kimberlin, being the idiot that he is, was actually arrested a few hours after that, after the plane landed at a real airport, because he went to retrieve the 50-pound bales of pot that they offloaded in southeast Texas.
We wouldn't just leave it laying around, man. Somebody's gonna.
He's capitalizing. He's willing to risk it for the biscuit.
All right. So, you know, that leads investigators. Not that, but investigators were still following up leads on the burger chef murders, which led them to places like Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Chicago, and this one's important, Dallas, Texas. So, why? Don't know. Couldn't find any extra details on why Dallas was connected, but it clearly was, and we also know Kimberlin was now going in and out of Texas. Now, don't have the exact spot in Texas. Texas, obviously, we know is large,
Huge.
but you know, we keep finding these little tie-ins
Yeah.
that all seem to come back to Kimberlin. So they were never able to find any more promising leads to locate any evidence that they believed would have been more useful. The firearm, the handle of the knife, and the chain used in the murders, they never found any of that. No perpetrators have made confessions to the police to date. So
At this time.
Yeah, so we're in the beginning of 1979.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has made any confessions to date. Though the son of the bearded suspect told police that he had confided, his dad, I guess, had confided in him that he was involved in the deaths. He was involved in these. So that's important because someone saw a bearded man, somebody saw a guy without a beard. So the bearded man and the other guy, that could have been Kimberlin and somebody. So maybe the bearded guy was kind of coming clean to his own son, but
Oh yeah.
Clearly
On your deathbed.
clearly didn't name Kimberlin in it.
Yeah.
Ken York, who was one of the original investigators on the case, noted that the death of the Greenwood suspect and the bearded suspect from an apparent suicide and a heart attack came suspiciously close after the release of the armed robber's name by Greenwood. So, all kind of weird. I don't
There's
know.
definitely dots that are
Yeah.
connecting, and
And
it's
the suicide, was it really suicide?
yeah, it's a very
Or
it's
was
very
that
questionable.
staged?
It's very
Or-
questionable.
Kimberlin, being the drug guy that he is, did he have enough influence on someone that they would take their own life as opposed to ratting him out?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, for Kimberlin, it doesn't. This saga continues. In June of 1980, he was actually convicted in Texas, federal court, of conspiracy to possess marijuana with the intent to distribute. He was given a 4-year sentence at that time, but in a separate trial in November of 1980, he was also convicted of possession and illegal use of Department of Defense insignia, which we've known him to try and get by.
He was trying to get those
he was-
illegal credentials.
100%. Illegally using the seal of the President of the United States and the impersonation of a federal officer. So he's just really racking things up here for himself. So then on those, in June of 1981, he was convicted of receipt of explosives by a convicted felon and then sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for that. It just gets worse and worse. In December of 1981, so same year, he was found in possession of an unregistered destructive device, unlawful manufacturing of a destructive device, IEDs or bombings, malicious damage by means of explosives, here's explosives again, and malicious damage by means of explosives involving personal injury. On those charges, Kimberlin received a sentence of 50 years in federal prison. His sentences, including the sentences for other crimes, were aggregated to a total of 51 years, 6 months, and 19 days. So all that, 51 years,
A lot of
6
time.
months, and 19 days. I wouldn't want to do it.
So he
But
should be
with
sitting
the-
in
I mean,
prison right now.
with this guy's fucking record of just getting out way earlier than he's supposed to, he's probably thinking like, oh, this is,
Yeah.
I ain't serving
And if he
this.
doesn't get out, then he'd be sitting in federal prison today.
Yeah.
And we'll touch on that at the end. So after his conviction, prosecutors finally released the yellow legal notepads. So remember we were talking about that earlier.
Part 1.
This was important because they confiscated those back in '78.
The year of all this shit.
And what was written on those when they finally released them was his plans to kill all eyewitnesses. To what? They didn't say. Eyewitnesses to what? The killing of Julius Cypress? The bombings? The Burger Chef murders? So he had these plans to get rid of everybody. That was going to essentially be a problem for him.
Yeah.
You know, obviously.
So a lot of premeditation. Again, he bought those timers 3 years prior. He's got legal pads that have,
these intricate
Yeah.
plans years before anything ever even takes place. So this guy is off his shit.
A little bit. So after the Burger Chef murders in '78, in November '78, the town of Speedway got quiet again, which makes sense because Kimberlin was making his rounds from Indiana to Texas, moving his drugs. So he seemed like he had done what he said he was going to do. I would get rid of my witnesses. So now he probably feels comfortable and he's moving forward, doing his drug business. In '83, the DeLong family, that was the gentleman who was injured, severely injured in the Speedway High School parking lot from one of the explosives that Kimberlin left behind, filed a civil suit after that gentleman, Carl DeLong, had committed suicide. He took his life due to depression following the loss of his leg and subsequent chronic pain and all of that stuff. That's what we found anyway on there. So I imagine there's some truth to that. I know his son, Steve, the musician, had spoke out on one of the TV shows, and I didn't gather the information that he spoke of to put in this podcast today because I have not spoken to Steve, so I didn't really have his approval to kind of quote him word for word because I couldn't find any articles that stated what it was, and I didn't want to just take stuff from a video that he had, I would say, graciously made for somebody to kind of share his side, his family's side of the story. So, but that is out there. I believe you can find it on YouTube. So if you want to hear a little more about it, and you want to hear it from Steve himself, I would recommend you go check that out because it's probably a little more enlightening as well. So a jury did order Kimberlin to pay the DeLong family $1.25 million for Carl's suicide and another $360 to Sandra DeLong for her injuries. That was the wife, Steve's mom. In '84, Detective Mel Wisely of the Marion County Sheriff's Department received a call from Donald Forrester, an inmate at the Pendleton Correctional Facility.
This is the first time you hear this name.
So, yes.
Donald Forrester.
Where we at here? Yeah. So Forrester claimed to have been involved in the murders and was willing to confess in order to avoid his scheduled transfer to a notoriously violent state prison.
He was protecting himself.
He was trying to protect himself. Now, Wisely received a court order to bring Forrester to Marion County, where he confessed to shooting Davis and Shelton, which we know both of them were shot. He led police to the crime scene in the woods, which that is this here, this photo. He accurately described the location and position of the bodies when they were found. He also knew about the broken handle of the knife, which was not widely publicized.
There's part 2 of that knife.
So they said widely publicized. So that tells me it was publicized somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
However, he seemed to know other stuff about this crime.
Yeah.
Knew the positioning of bodies, things like that. I don't imagine they publicized that. I mean, I guess they could have, but it doesn't mention it.
I would
he
say
knows something about this.
Yeah.
Clearly,
well, and I mean, he was in jail, so he was in Pendleton. Did he have an opportunity to see any of it? I mean, well, it's all speculation, but it's very odd that it wasn't publicized completely. That he knows all of this information. I can't imagine that they would have publicized where these bodies were found.
Yeah, just besides the woods and
right.
Yeah. So what gets a little more interesting here, so according to Forrester, Jane Frieden's brother, James, remember Jane was the assistant manager, owed money on a drug deal. And so he
the drug lord.
and 3 other associates, so that gives us 3 people, not 2 that the eyewitness saw, but 3 people, had gone to the restaurant to threaten her. Okay, so drugs again. Everyone knows Kimberlin was the
drug lord,
drug kingpin, the drug guy for Speedway. Everybody knows that. So, is that tied into it? But I mean, to me, there's a tie. I mean,
100%.
whether you connected him and whether it's legit, it seems to be another tie. There's just so many of these that unfold. So when they went to threaten her, Flemings, one of the 16-year-olds, had intervened to try to protect her. A fight broke out in which, according to Forrester, Flemings fell and hit his head on the bumper of a car. Believing he was dead or dying, Forrester and his accomplices decided to abduct and kill all the employees to eliminate all witnesses to the crime. So that's important to remember. They said he fell and hit his head on the bumper of the car, and they thought he was dead or dying. Now, we already know that they said he died from being bludgeoned with possibly a chain. That's going to have a different look than you falling and cracking your head on a bumper.
Correct. I mean,
So that doesn't match up.
A chain, I feel like, is just a very malicious and noticeable attack. Where it's like, if I hit my head on the bumper of a car, that's like a solo.
And you're not swinging the chain once. You're swinging it over and over. You're beating somebody. Yeah, you're bludgeoning the shit out of somebody. So Forrester could have very well been there, but he's lying in one regard, I think, to how some of the deaths happened. Like, I'm gonna talk about the death, but I'm not gonna say that I did it or someone else did it. I'm gonna say he fell.
Yeah, it's almost like he was downplaying that one.
Absolutely downplaying it in my mind. So, but Forrester did claim to have shot both Davis and Shelton, which we know they were, and he gave the names of 3 men he claimed were responsible for killing Flemings and Jane Friedman. So we don't have those names. So, and clearly he didn't give up Kimberlin's name. I mean, obviously that would have been all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
We would have been able to find that tie. He then led the police to a spot where he claimed he had thrown the gun into a river. However, the search in the river found no weapon. So who knows? I mean, it's been a while. It's been a number of years.
That's kind of what I think with the river piece. It's like current. Okay, now everybody's like on that big magnet fishing thing. Like, who knows?
It's probably easier to find it today than it would have been back then. And what river would you throw it in that would you really feel would get away with? White River.
White River. That's
White River's huge. I mean, it flows fast. You know, it's
that's
and they're not going to have the technology back then to hunt these things down. I mean, it's just
they're already jacking shit up from the jump.
Right.
It does get kind of interesting because Wilsey, who was another detective on this case, interviewed Forrester's ex-wife, who said that he had driven with her out to a wooded area shortly after the murders, retrieved a bunch of shell casings, which he then flushed down the toilet. So Wilsey got a warrant to search the septic tank of the house, and that actually turned up several spent .38 caliber shell casings. So there's your .38 caliber piece that you needed to remember.
Which he clearly is admitting that. I shot those 2.
Flushed it.
We know that it was done with 38.
Flushed the casings. Okay. Well,
she says that's what they retrieved.
Yep. That's crazy. But things kind of went awry because someone within the sheriff's office leaked all these details of Forrester's cooperation. And then suddenly he recanted his entire confession and claimed that the police coerced him into saying all of this stuff. Which is crazy because he's given specific cues or pieces of information that's necessary in this investigation that are dot connecting pieces of information. So with no further cooperation from Forrester and no direct evidence proving that he committed the murders, Forrester was never charged. On a side note, or cliff note, the reported money owed by Fright's brother James on the drug deal could potentially have been the link from these murders to Brett Kimberlin, because again, he was a well-known drug dealer at that time, and these people ran with Brett Kimberlin.
Here's a question I got. How the hell do you not charge Forrester with something when he admitted to shooting both of them, and they found the shell casings? I mean, he basically, the whole thing is admitted to at least 2 of them.
Well, here's.
And I don't get how they couldn't go after that further, because you have his admission, you have him admitting this shit.
Well, but then you've got coercion.
Kind of blows my mind.
You'd have to have the gun.
And why did he recant?
Probably
because
also,
it got leaked.
Probably also to protect himself, but you'd have to. I don't know.
I mean, this is a fucked up situation as it is. I mean, everybody who's an eyewitness seems to end up dead.
Right.
But you'd have to have the gun
himself
to shoot. You'd have to have the gun to shoot again to match casings. Is what you found in the septic tank the exact same one that came out of this gun a second time? There's your correlating piece.
Right.
But without that gun, how are you going to do that? I don't know why I don't know why 38 caliber shell casings would end up in a septic tank for any other reason than
Then you flush them down and put them down there.
because it's a part
And
of
it's the ones you
this.
picked up from the thing, and that's what his wife said they did.
100%.
I mean, so I do believe this guy is involved.
Different day and
I
age.
believe he's involved,
It's-
and he's also guilty. So,
Yeah.
So this now we go all the way fast forward to November of 1988, and Kimberlin was in federal prison. There was a reporter, and I'm just going to briefly touch on this because it's a lot of hearsay. In my opinion, it's a lot of hearsay from the articles, and you guys can look it up and read further into it and make your own
This
call
piece
on it.
is-
But there was a reporter who said that Kimberlin had claimed to have sold marijuana to, at that time, Republican vice presidential candidate Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle is from Indiana.
Well, he went to school. Yeah, he went to school
Went to school in the
at
area and so
the
forth.
law school in Indianapolis.
And so, yeah, maybe there's a tie, maybe there's not. Who knows? I can't confirm any of that. I didn't even bother to try because I really didn't think it was that important. We're not trying to put any sort of politics into this, but and if you did, so what?
I mean, it's the 70s and 80s. Would I be fucking shocked if a vice presidential candidate smoked some pot?
If any
No,
politician was smoking a little
No!
pot, I mean, probably got plenty of them doing it today. So,
I'm sure.
so that's whatever. So if you guys want to look that up, feel free to look it up on your own. But Kimberlin also started proclaiming his innocence. So a lot of time has now gone by. We're 10 years out from the bombings, the murders. He's trying to proclaim his innocence. Tried to say his younger brother Scott was involved in it, and it wasn't him.
That was specifically for the bombings, which there was a
Right.
lot of damning as evidence, the timers, the wiring that all matched what. So I can see
Right.
where he's like, deflect, which he
Absolutely.
is notorious for doing. He used the bombings to deflect from Julius Cypher's murder.
Absolutely.
He's a deflecting artist.
So we go forward a little further, and in '93, an appeals court overturns the $1.25 million that he's supposed to pay the DeLongs, but they upheld the damages awarded to Miss DeLong, the $360,000, but got rid of the $1.25 million.
That pissed me off.
Don't know
like,
how
why?
that
Because he's
happens.
dead and she's
Yeah.
alive? Like, what?
So then we get to November of '93, and this lovely photo right
This
here.
motherfucker.
Kimberlin is paroled in November of '93. He served 13 years of his 51-year sentence. That's it.
How is he doing
If
this?
he'd have served that 51 years, he'd be in prison today.
Mhm.
So, but he's not, and he got out in '93. After Kimberlin's parole, the next year, he signed a contract with the New Yorker with staff writer Mark Singer, who had written a positive profile of Kimberlin back in '92, published a book about his claims regarding both his convictions and his relationship with Quayle. However, I guess in the discussions and everything with Kimberlin, Singer decided that Kimberlin was not telling the truth about Quayle and kind of cut him off, and no book deal, no nothing ever came from it. So
Yeah.
I guess that's somewhat of a positive because then he didn't turn around and make, hundreds of thousands or millions off of some book deal. So that never happened.
Correct. That would have been really jacked up and pissed me off more.
Right.
The good bit of news in 1994, our Indiana's Supreme Court actually overturned the appeals court ruling, so they restored the original $1.25 million judgment that Kimberlin was supposed to pay the DeLongs. With that, Kimberlin's parole was also revoked, so he was sent and shipped back to prison in '97. Don't think the story doesn't continue how it's been, because he got there in prison in 1997. He was re-released in 2001, so
4 years later.
Just keeps getting out.
It's so
Just
unbelievable.
keeps getting out.
However, Forrester, who was working with the cops, he was imprisoned on other charges. To wrap up his story, he died in prison from cancer in 2006 at the age of 55. Then during the summer of 2018, our Speedway community, as well as the family and friends of all the 4 victims, raised some money to plant 4 red oak trees to honor the victims. They're in Leonard Park. Each tree has a plaque with just kind of a short biography of each of the victims. The original monetary goal that they set to try and do this fundraiser or philanthropy, whichever you want to look at it as, that was surpassed within 24 hours. So with all the extra funds that they were able to bring in, a marble bench was also installed and dedicated to their family and friends. On November 10th, 2018, 1 week before the 40th anniversary, a small dedication ceremony for the family and friends was held at the memorial site. Again, that was at Leonard Park here in Speedway.
So it's nice. At least there's something out
Yeah.
there to remember them by. So,
Yep.
Despite thousands of hours of police investigations, as well as Burger Chef offering a reward of $25,000 back then to anyone who could capture murderers or provide information about their whereabouts, the attackers were never officially found, and no one has ever officially been charged with the murders, and the case remains officially unsolved. The Indiana State Police have continued to keep the case open and have reportedly investigated the use of DNA tracing techniques developed since the initial investigation, which kind of curious about how they're doing that, because we know that the place got cleaned up right after the fact, and today we know that it's gone. They demoed, the building. So
I have an instinct that it's probably any of the 3's fingerprints. What fingerprints were found on the bodies? Kind of that additional
that'd be something.
evidence that
So
they were
they've
able
got
to
something
find
that-
aside from
absolutely.
what they lost at the actual Burger Chef restaurant.
So in 21, Kimberlin had appealed his convictions, alleging misuse of microscopic hair evidence and the loss of biological evidence and jury tampering by the government. So, nice one.
He's stretching it.
The Seventh Circuit Court rejected his appeal in 2022. However, he's out. He's released.
And never paid a dime to the DeLong family.
And unfortunately today he has never paid a single penny to the DeLong family at all. It's horrible to think that they never got anything out of it.
But tragedy.
But tragedy. I mean, the loss is bad enough. The damage done mentally, physically, is bad enough. They got nothing. Here's the Burger Chef. Well, it used to be Burger Chef. So it's a little quick story on the Burger Chef. So it was Burger Chef turned into a Hardee's. I actually trained at that Hardee's. My very first job was working for Hardee's.
That's pretty cool.
I trained there for a couple days, and they sent us to another Hardee's. The Dunkin' Donuts next door is now a tobacco store.
Yeah,
I
that
think
is
it's
smoker friendly.
Still a tobacco store. So anyway, it's gone. They just did this. Was it this year?
It was this year.
This year. Which some people were kind of up in arms about it, because they're like, oh, well, they're going to tear down any potential chance that there's any evidence left. There wasn't any evidence left.
It's 2024. That was 1978.
So long ago, and it's changed hands. It was last some cash advance place or
Yeah.
whatever. So
Cash advance.
So it's out. So this is our guy right here. This is the last guy, and what's terribly sad about the whole thing here in the end is, despite never having paid them a single penny, this man, Brent Kimberlin, lives free today at 70 years old in Bethesda, Maryland. Why he's free, I don't know, when there is a more than $1 million judgment against him and he's not paying it.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, my opinion, he should be locked up for at least that.
Oh.
This is how this guy has managed to keep himself out of jail and prison, even though he's been back and forth so often. He get himself back out all the time.
Yeah, I wish there was an explanation for that. But hopefully,
It's disappointing.
today's episode or this podcast gave you some insight to Burger Chef and all of the craziness that was going on in our little town of Speedway, Indiana back in the late 70s. If nothing else, hopefully it gets you equally as excited to see what the upcoming documentary is all about that will be on Amazon and several other streaming platforms this Friday.
This Friday.
Yep.
So that's important.
Absolutely. Make sure you check that out. Again, if you're a local, you remember any pieces of this or the rumors or what the town gossip was at that time, please leave us a comment. Let us know. We would love to read that. We'll probably respond to you touching base and giving our feedback. But hopefully you enjoyed this podcast, this episode. If you don't already, make sure you click like, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.
If you're on YouTube, smash that subscribe button, and Facebook, make sure you're following, and then share it. Tell all your friends. So we'd love to have more of you on here, and love to talk to more of you, and meet more of you, and so forth. We'll let you know when we got our next investigation coming up. We don't have that scheduled yet, but we will, and we'll have another podcast probably, I'd say, within 2 weeks,
Potentially,
if not
yeah.
sooner. You never know what we'll do.
Yep, we'll
So,
see how things
live
go.
and raw. Thank you guys for watching.
Later, Ghost Gang.
Take care. So what are you doing? Guilty?
There's no
100%.
question. I think it absolutely is completely correlated to each other. I think Julia, I think the bombings, I think that it would be too coincidental for it not to be.
Yeah.
There's just no way. And just
100%
to
agree.
know that he is a deflection king,
Right.
and it just it's like a continuous cycle that you read
Yeah.
as you're unfolding this fucked up story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we were talking with Chip, human, and so it got me thinking. And so when I started going through that timeline and putting all that together, it's just like you almost sit there and awe about how it all unfolds.
I mean, I've never seen dots connect easily.
No,
So it
And
also blows my mind. that
nothing crosses to where you can rule it out.
There'd be no alibi.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's crazy.